Blancpain refuses to give you the watch that everyone actually wants, a 40mm 50 Fathoms in normal production in steel, freely available. They won't do it. They release it in limited editions. They prove that the proportions work and then they pull it away. And that tells you everything about Blancpain, because this is a brand that will build one of the most historically important dive watches ever made and then place a complete calendar moonphase inside it, a professional dive instrument with poetry on the dial. Today we're going deep into the Blancpain dive watch universe. We begin with the 40mm 50 Fathoms that they refuse to standardise. We explore the Quantieme Complete moonphase diver that shouldn't exist but somehow it does. Then we're going to break down the 42.5mm and the 45mm 50 Fathoms Automatique models and how each actually wears with on-the-wrist experience. And then we'll finish with the most accessible way to put Blancpain on your wrist, which could be the most interesting deep dive of all. There are a few surprises along the way. Some of them are mechanical, some of them philosophical. One of them costs less than servicing the largest watch in this lineup. But let's begin with the watch that they won't make. The 40mm 50 Fathoms is, in many eyes, the enthusiast's dream. Balanced bezel, perfect dial aperture, no wasted surface area, vintage proportion without artificial nostalgia. On the wrist it feels composed, contained, intentional. It channels the original military spirit of the 1950s without trying to cosplay it. And Blancpain will not put this configuration into regular production. That's not an oversight, it is strategy. Blancpain does not compete on ubiquity, it competes on narrative density. The 50 Fathoms, it's not designed to be everywhere, it's designed to feel deliberate. The first surprise is this: Blancpain understands exactly what enthusiasts want, and then it chooses restraint anyway. But then the brand takes an even stranger turn. Enter the Quantieme Complete Phase de Lune, a complete calendar, day, date, month and moonphase in a dive watch case. On paper this is contradictory. A dive watch is supposed to be a tool, clear, legible, focused. A complete calendar is expressive, romantic, complicated. Yet within Blancpain's world, this configuration, it makes complete sense. Because the 50 Fathoms, it was never positioned as disposable equipment. It carries literary references. It carries heritage beyond specification sheets. It carries philosophy. The moonphase does not help you at 200 metres underwater. It helps you above the surface. It reminds you that time is not only measured in minutes and decompression stops. The second surprise is this: the complication does not dilute the dive watch identity. It reveals the intellectual consistency of the brand. But eventually the conversation returns to mass and presence. The modern 50 Fathoms Automatique, it comes in two dominant available sizes, 42.5mm and 45mm. The 45mm Automatique is the statement: broad bezel, expansive dial, confident stance. It does not shrink to accommodate hesitation. On the wrist it feels like equipment, serious, engineered, built. And yet the curved lugs draw the case inward. The sapphire bezel catches light in a way that visually reduces bulk. The weight distribution is more balanced than the dimensions might suggest. The third surprise is this: the 45mm wears more controlled than it looks. Then the 42.5mm, this is not simply a smaller 45, it is a recalibrated watch, more versatile, more adaptable to varied wrists, still unmistakably a 50 Fathoms, where the 45mm feels like a statement of presence. The 42.5 feels like precision, it's honed in, it maintains the depth rating, it maintains the full identity, but it shifts the energy. If the 45 is equipment, The 42.5 is refinement, and then we pivot. We pivot to somewhere completely unexpected, almost down market. Dramatically, the Blancpain Swatch collaboration watch, the Ocean of Storms. Bioceramic case, playful execution, accessible pricing. For many people, this will be their first contact with the 50 Fathoms and the Blancpain brand. And here is where assumptions get completely challenged, because while it's not haute horology, it's not hollow either. The automatic movement inside it performs more consistently than the critics expect. The case design retains key visual cues. The dial carries surprising depth. The fourth surprise is this: it captures more of the Blancpain spirit than many are comfortable actually admitting. You do not buy it instead of a 45mm Automatique. You buy it as a different doorway, and that doorway matters. So here is what follows in this documentary: a deeper exploration of the 40mm myth and why Blancpain protects it so fiercely, a full examination of the Quantième Complet phase de lune and the contrarian logic of a moonphase diver, a detailed wrist comparison between the 42.5 and the 45mm fathoms under real conditions, and then an honest assessment of the Ocean of Storms with an open mind. This is not a ranking exercise, it's not hype. This is an examination of a brand that refuses to behave predictably. Blancpain, they build tension between tool and art, between engineering and poetry, between exclusivity and access. And in that tension, the 50 Fathoms, it survives, not because it dominates the market. It doesn't. It's a watch with an individual Q factor all of its own. It's not up there with a Submariner, it's not up there with a Seamaster, but it's its own thing. Blancpain is a full series of watches with a unique resonance Q factor all their own. Let's dive into this. Welcome back to Horological. Today we're tackling a watch that Blancpain collectors have begged for, a wearable 40mm no radiations 50 Fathoms. Blancpain doesn't make one of these watches in regular production, but a $200 homage shows exactly what enthusiasts are asking for. My family's connection to Westclocks in Scotland, that gave me an early awareness of how watchmaking has changed over the decades, especially with regard to lume. The no radiation symbol, it's not just a quirky vintage detail, it marks the point when the industry moved away from dangerous radium lume paint and towards safer practices. It's a dial logo that carries genuine meaning. Stay with me till the end, because I'm going to settle one of the biggest misunderstandings in dive watch history. Which came first, the 50 Fathoms or the Submariner? So what can you actually buy today? In 2025, Blancpain launched a regular production 38mm 50 Fathoms using a calibre 1150-1153 family, power reserve of around 100 hours. Some versions hack the calibre 1153 and others don't, the calibre 1151. Movement finishing levels are high, really high, nice with a sapphire exhibition case back. At the other end of the size spectrum, the 45mm 50 Fathoms Automatique with the calibre 1315, the flagship dive watch in the Blancpain catalogue with a movement to match, 5-day power reserve from a triple sequential barrel arrangement, hacking seconds, silicon balance and serious robustness and haute horology levels of finishing, 18 karat gold rotor, ongulage, perlage, exquisite hand finishing with a price and exclusivity to match. So your current choices are 38mm or 45mm. What's missing is a standard production 40mm 50 Fathoms watch. They only make these as limited edition specials. The 2021 No Radiations was limited to 500 individually numbered pieces globally. Let's look at a watch spec slide of that exact 2021 Blancpain 50 Fathoms No Radiations reissue. So we've got We've got a case diameter of 40.3mm, we've got a thickness of 13.2mm including the domed crystal, we've got a lug width of 20mm, lug to lug's 46mm, and it has the in-house calibre 1151 automatic 3Hz non-hacking movement. Power reserve is 100 hours coming from sequential twin barrels. The crystal is box domed sapphire with AR coating on the underside. The water resistance is 300 metres and the weight is 93 grams on the OEM strap that it comes with. Blancpain is famous for the 50 Fathoms, but there are some things about the brand you probably didn't know. Let's break down 5 of them. The oldest watch brand that went silent, founded in 1735 but went dormant during the quartz crisis. Revived in the 1980s by Jean-Claude Biver and Jacques Piquet. No quartz, no smartwatches ever. One of the only ateliers to pledge it will never produce quartz or smartwatches. Very brave of them. The United States Navy's secret Blancpain. Because of the Buy American Act of 1933, Blancpain couldn't sell to the US Navy directly. However, importer Alan V. Torneg rebadged them as the Torneg Ravel TR900. The no radiations logo explained. That bright yellow and red symbol, that's an assurance of tritium lume, not dangerous radium. This was adopted early by German Navy divers. Germany in particular had strict rules concerning the use of radium in military equipment. Blancpain's Bundeswehr issued 50 Fathoms watches were required to be free of radium lume. Blancpain are more than just a dive watch brand. They also make ultra high complications, exquisite flyback chronographs for example, and Chinese calendar watches. They've also got stellar enamel work from a small, highly specialised studio, separate from the main atelier, with its own workflow and some of the most skilled dial enamelers in the face of the planet. So the next time someone says, oh Blancpain, that's just the 50 Fathoms company, well now you'll know there's a lot more going on beneath that particular surface than first appears, and that was an intended pun. So why won't Blancpain just build the watch we want? The calibre 1315 is too large for a 40mm case. It's designed for a 45mm case. The 1150 family of movements, the 1151, the 1153, they do fit smaller cases, but in a 40mm case shell, it needs a spacer ring, and Blancpain seems to hate that solution. So their choice for the moment is 38mm or 45mm in regular production, and that leaves a gap right where enthusiasts want a 40mm hacking modern specification 50 Fathoms watch. These are the exact situations that homage watches play hard in. This watch dive's NORAD homage cost $200 with a domed sapphire crystal upgrade. This particular watch is no longer available, but I have heard they are working on a new version made from grade 2 titanium, whereas this one is media blasted to give the appearance of titanium but is actually 316L stainless steel. The case profile is based on the Torneg Ravel TR900 previously mentioned, somewhat, not exactly, but it gets close. Ironically closer in spirit to the Navy issue original than many luxury 50 Fathoms that are created today. Bulova have recently reissued the Millships W2181. Hamilton also make a similar khaki navy scuba reference watch as well. Bulova, Hamilton and Torneg Ravel, amongst a few others, were essentially competing for the exact same Navy supply contracts, and that's why there is design overlap between all these watches. This watch dives looks like matte titanium. It was also marketed that way, perhaps showing future intent, but as previously mentioned, it's actually 316L stainless steel with a fine media bead blasted effect on it to give it that titanium looking dullness. It has a military style stereo case back. There was an earlier version of this watch that had 19mm wide lugs, but this version here definitely has 20mm wide lugs. I've measured it several times in the calipers, and the silicone strap that's on it just now was definitely ordered as a 20mm wide strap. It fits perfect. As far as I have been able to research, this watch was also released in very limited production numbers, and before this titanium version they're working on becomes available, it's almost they ran this as a kind of prototype and seeded it out to the public. It's not individually numbered, but only available to order for around a month. Then it was discontinued. It could possibly be as rare as that Blancpain 2021 reissue. How ironic would that be? Military divers deliberately dulled their watches to avoid sunlight reflections that could give away their position. And here's where my own personal experience proves the point. Snorkeling in Corfu 20 years ago, I wore a shiny luxury dive watch. A barracuda patrolling the edge of the reef caught a glint of that watch and it swam straight at me. A real Sigourney Weaver moment. I panicked, I flayed my arms, and I ended up shoving my hand straight onto a sea urchin. There was a painful lesson learned that day. Shiny ain't safe in predator-infested waters. That's why I question Blancpain's current approach. Their modern 50 Fathoms offerings, they lean heavily into polished luxury finishing, stunning on land, but arguably less suited to actual diving than the old matte tool-forward designs they once pioneered. Blancpain are rightly leaning into their heritage, but their business decisions and what collectors actually want are starting to drift apart. There's a real cognitive dissonance in that strategy. I swapped the cheap but passable NATO this watch arrived on for an alpine strap silicone with yellow stitching. It matches the NORAD's logo pretty well and it makes it a joy to wear. I now have a bit of a history of using these straps in my daily divers. The beloved Marine Star, my Omega Seamaster 300M Professional, and now this NORAD's. I'll just chuck a quick spec slide on screen and we'll talk through this actual watch now. So we've got a case diameter of 40mm, a thickness of 13.2, a lug width of 20mm as mentioned, a lug to lug of 48. The movement is an NH35 Seiko automatic, 3Hz movement. Power reserves round about 41 hours. The crystal is a box dome sapphire. Water resistance is a stated 300 metres, and the weight is 91 grams on this alpine silicone strap. The NH35, it hacks and hand winds, but it leaves a ghost date position. The NH38 movement from Seiko would have fixed that, but it costs more, it's a lot harder to source in bulk, and for a $200 watch it's an understandable compromise. For me, having those hacking seconds, it beats not having the hacking seconds every single time. And that neatly leads me on to this kicker. Blancpain released in 2021 their own homage to the original NORAD's 50 Fathoms. It had no hacking settings. It also came in the modern 50 Fathom style case, sized at 40.3mm instead of 45. It used the caliber 1151 movement. It didn't have hacking settings. A watch at that price that didn't hack. It also had the Invicta style Blancpain text on the side of the case. This much anticipated watch was limited to 500 pieces worldwide, and quite frankly, this watch had missed the mark. A quick summary: the Blancpain NORAD's 2021 reissue, authentic but no hacking. Watch Dive's homage, $200. It has hacking, but it is a ghost date click. No watch is perfect, it seems, even one at almost 100 times the price. Blancpain is moving smaller with the 38mm and that's encouraging, but their watches remain shiny, polished showpieces with no true heritage offering on the horizon anytime soon. My Barracuda encounter makes me wonder, are these really the dive watches that Jacques Cousteau would have trusted? Or are they now just more high-end jewellery for the surface dweller, the archetypal desk diver, the collector's dream? The 40mm 50 Fathoms NORADs in a vintage style case with flagship specifications and actual availability, it hasn't arrived yet. Blancpain remains a distant grail for me. My 2018 Rolex Submariner is here to stay, but I'd love to add a 50 Fathoms to my collection. It's just they refuse to make the watch I want. I do like some of the Bathyscaphe references and I'll not rule out adding one of them to my collection at some point in the future. Blancpain seem to have lost their way with the 50 Fathoms reference over several aspects of how they choose to interpret it in a modern form factor. The homage brands are extremely active in forums. and actively engage with their customers, perhaps Blancpain should take note. The homage is often a reminder of what collectors are asking for, but Blancpain refuse to deliver in any meaningful way. A brand can truly sabotage itself. From a consultancy perspective, get out your checkbook here, Blancpain. Make a 40mm traditional T900 style case, TR900 style case. No date, with hacking settings, less decorated movement, military style caseback. Undercut slightly the price point of the Rolex Submariner, position it just above the Omega Seamaster 300M Professional, and make it widely available. Then Blancpain would have problems. Real problems. Problems keeping up with the demand for this watch. That watch would be a surefire winner, and we all know it. Are you in the same room, Blancpain? And there is a wider point going on here. Homage companies have built viable, scalable businesses by actually listening to watch collectors. They test prototypes, they ask for votes, and they respond to what enthusiasts want, often faster than the large Swiss ateliers who curate their champagne offerings more diligently than the watches that they create and sell, pushing out watches of gate-kept mediocrity often faster than they can pour that Louis Roederer into a flute glass for you. That's why this homage resonates with me. It fills a slot in my watch box that Blancpain refused to acknowledge even exists. In the world of Blancpain vintage auctions, there's a shadow story collectors also can't ignore. Independent researchers allege that some of the eye-watering prices for early 50 Fathoms examples weren't purely the result of bidding wars, but may have been driven by insider participation, with Swatch Group themselves being accused of quietly bidding on their own heritage pieces to push values higher and increase historical brand equity to mythical levels. It makes sense. If you've got a marketing budget of £100,000, what kind of penetration in today's saturated market is that going to make? Not much, but if you pay that for a watch, it becomes front page news, especially in horology related magazines and press websites. Look at how the Paul Newman Daytona became front page news, or one of those Monaco watches that Steve McQueen wore in the Le Mans movie. As watch collectors, we all know those stories, and Blancpain have become a brand that has also accessed that kind of marketing story. And here's the twist. Whenever you place a bid online at Christie's, Phillips, Sotheby's, Bonhams, your IP address is recorded. They know exactly where those bids have came from. If multiple bids really did originate from inside Swatch Group networks, as alleged, the auction houses would definitely know this. But no auction house has ever confirmed or denied these rumours officially. There's no forensic proof in the public domain, and no legal case has ever forced full disclosure. Yet the silence from the auction houses themselves, while under fierce scrutiny, speaks volumes. The net result of all this? Classic Blancpain 50 Fathoms references, especially the NORADs and the Tournette Rayville models, they have become unobtainium for ordinary watch collectors, locked away in the world of six-figure auctions and sealed provenance. And that's exactly why homage brands and alternatives thrive, because they give enthusiasts a way to actually experience and interact with these legendary designs in hand and on wrist without auction price gouging or manufactured corporate gatekeeping. So here's the question: would you pay Blancpain money for a product widely acknowledged as being flawed and compromised? A hard to obtain product that doesn't quite hit the spot? Or would you compromise with an equally flawed homage product but at 98% less financial outlay? For me, this homage isn't a substitute for a Blancpain. It's a reminder of what collectors regularly want and ask for, and proof that sometimes the smaller upstarts listen better than the big ateliers. Ironically, this specific homage is no longer listed as available on the Watch Dives website. It leaves one to speculate that perhaps the brand that refuses to make the reference collectors are clamouring for may also be protecting that reference to prevent other companies fulfilling that demand. Or maybe Watch Dives are watching the scarcity business model of the Swiss and copying that as well as copying the watches. When you overview Blancpain's product decisions, product and marketing decisions, especially compared to Omega, many collectors feel that Blancpain is intentionally kept as a small, ultra-luxury niche brand within Swatch Group, and I'm speculating wildly here. Could this be to protect the market position of the Omega Seamaster 300M Professional and Planet Ocean watches? These are watches that Blancpain's own products could directly threaten if produced and marketed aggressively within the Swatch Group ecosystem. Whether that's deliberate strategy or simply market positioning, the effect is the same. Blancpain seems to always ignore the watches that collectors actually want to buy. Right, time to settle the debate the watch world still argues about. Historically, the 50 Fathoms did come first. That is undisputed. It was wrapped up in military secrecy, but it beat the Submariner to the punch. But in my collection, after everything we've covered here today, the Submariner got there first. And yes, it's the Hulk. And remember, collecting watches isn't logical, but it is horological. The complete calendar isn't misunderstood because it's complicated. It's misunderstood because we keep judging it by the wrong standards. This is a Blancpain bathyscaphe, Quantième Complet Phase de Lune. On paper it shouldn't exist. A dive watch with a full calendar and a moonphase. But that contradiction isn't a mistake, it's the entire point. And once you understand that, the complete calendar stops looking inferior and starts to look intentional. This is the Blancpain bathyscaphe complete calendar, or to give it its full proper name, the Blancpain bathyscaphe Quantième Complet Phase de Lune. And on paper, it's an odd thing. A dive watch with a complete calendar and a moonphase. That combination alone is enough to confuse people, because somewhere along the way we decided that complications have strict job descriptions. Dive watches are supposed to be tough, simple and utilitarian. Calendars are supposed to live under cuffs, far away from water, impact or spontaneity. And yet here this watch is, quietly ignoring all of that. The misunderstanding of the complete calendar begins right there. Not with mechanics, not with cost, but with expectation. Most people encounter the complete calendar only in comparison to the perpetual calendar. And in that comparison, it always seems to come off worse. It doesn't know the length of the months. It needs adjustment at the end of the shorter ones. It requires interaction. And in a modern world that equates progress with automation, that's framed as a weakness. But that framing misses the point entirely, because the complete calendar, it isn't trying to be a perpetual calendar. It never was. The complete calendar belongs to a different philosophy of timekeeping, one where interaction is not a flaw, but a feature. When you live with a complete calendar, you participate in it. You advance the date when the month turns. You notice February ending. You engage with the passage of time rather than outsourcing it to the movement. That interaction isn't accidental, it's fundamental, and this is where the bathyscaphe Quantième Complet becomes genuinely interesting, because Blancpain didn't place a complete calendar inside a dive watch by mistake. They did it because both objects, the diver and the complete calendar, they share the same underlying assumption that the wearer is present. A dive watch assumes you'll wind it, set it and rely on it in changing conditions. A complete calendar assumes you'll observe time passing and occasionally intervene. Both reject the idea that the watch should disappear into the background entirely, and that's an increasingly unfashionable idea. Modern watch culture often celebrates complications as autonomy. The less the wearer has to do, the more advanced the watch is perceived to be. Let's look at a quick spec slide of this watch. The case diameter is 43.6mm, the thickness is 13.4mm, the lug width 23mm, the lug to lug 49.5mm, the movement is the 6654.P4 automatic complete calendar secured movement moonphase. The crystal, sapphire with AR, water resistance is 300 metres and the weight is 100 grams on the OE strap. Just a quick note on the secured movement. That doesn't mean Blancpain secured the movement tightly into the case. It means that you can change any of the settings on this calendar watch at any time without any risk to damaging the movement. Perpetual calendars, annual calendars, multi-decade memory mechanisms, they are marvels of engineering, no doubt, but they also change the relationship between the wearer and the watch, because with a perpetual calendar, control is conditional. You're allowed to interact, but only in specific windows and conditions, only in certain directions, only if the mechanism agrees. Set it wrong, and suddenly the watch, it's not yours anymore. It becomes something you must send away, something you mustn't touch, something that punishes curiosity. That isn't a technical failing, it's a philosophical choice. A perpetual calendar treats time as something to be managed for you. A complete calendar treats time as something you are trusted to manage with it. And that distinction matters more often than we care to admit. The Bathyscaphe Quantième Complet, it doesn't ask you to tiptoe around it. It doesn't threaten you with catastrophic consequences if you interact incorrectly. If something is off, you correct it. If the month ends, you advance it. If it's been off the wrist, you reset it. There is no fear, only familiarity. That sense of control is deeply satisfying if you enjoy watches not as objects of status, but as instruments you live with on a daily basis. It's the difference between owning a tool and being entrusted with an artefact. And this is where the dive watch context becomes essential rather than contradictory. A dive watch is about reliability, legibility, and confidence under imperfect conditions. You don't wear a diver because it's delicate, you wear it because it's dependable. The Bathyscaphe carries that mindset into the calendar complication. This isn't a calendar you're scared to use, it's one that assumes competence. It trusts the wearer implicitly, and that trust fundamentally changes the emotional relationship. Instead of anxiety, you get engagement. Instead of reverence, you get familiarity. Instead of custodianship, you get ownership. The moonphase reinforces this beautifully. The moonphase is often dismissed as romantic fluff, decorative, poetic, unnecessary. But in the context of a complete calendar, it serves a different role. It anchors the watch to natural cycles rather than artificial precision. You don't constantly correct the moonphase, you observe it. It reminds you that time isn't just measured, it's experienced. That contrast between what you adjust and what you observe is where the complete calendar finds its balance. You intervene when necessary, you let the rest unfold. That's a very human way of relating to time, and it's something the perpetual calendar, for all its brilliance, often abstracts away. There's also something important about where the complete calendar sits historically. It was never meant to be the ultimate complication. It was meant to be practical, legible, and robust enough for daily use. It offered meaningful information, day, date, month, sometimes moon, without demanding reverence. Calendars became viable in wristwatches. It wasn't a compromise. It was a solution. And in many ways it still is, because most people don't live the kind of life that benefits from a watch that tracks leap years autonomously. They live lives where watches are worn, set down, picked up, reset, worn again. In that reality, the complete calendar often makes more sense than the perpetual. It tolerates interruption. It forgives mistakes. It resumes without drama. It doesn't need to live in a watchwinder. In the Bathyscaphe Quantième Complet, it leans into that reality rather than denying it. It doesn't pretend to be a museum piece. It isn't asking to be handled with kid gloves. It's asking to be worn. And that's a subtle but important distinction. There's a broader idea here about how we talk about progress in watchmaking. We often assume that more complexity equals improvement. But sometimes complexity just shifts responsibility away from the wearer, like all the safety systems in modern cars. And not everyone wants that. Some of us enjoy assuming full control, winding a watch, setting a date, advancing a calendar at the end of the month, actually driving a performance car. Those actions don't feel like chores, they feel like connection. They remind you that the mechanical watches are not about convenience. If they were, we'd all already be wearing devices that update themselves perfectly. We'd all be wearing smartwatches. Mechanical watches exist precisely because we don't want that. They exist because we value involvement. And the complete calendar is one of the clearest expressions of that philosophy. It gives you information, but it doesn't absolve you of responsibility. It invites you into the process. The Bathyscaphe Quantième Complet is compelling because it doesn't apologise for that. It doesn't try to disguise interaction as flaw. It embraces it. In doing so, it becomes something more interesting than either a simple diver or a hyper-complex calendar watch. It becomes a statement about what kind of relationship you want with time. Do you want time managed invisibly in the background, or do you want to participate in it? Neither answer is wrong, but pretending they're the same is where the confusion begins. The complete calendar isn't misunderstood because it's inadequate. It's misunderstood because it refuses to conform to modern ideas of frictionless perfection. It assumes a thinking wearer. And the Bathyscaphe Quantième Complet makes that assumption confidently. It doesn't shout about it. It doesn't justify itself. It simply exists, quietly competent, robust, and honest about what it is. A watch that trusts you. There's also a reason the moonphase here feels so familiar. Blancpain's moon, like Breguet's, isn't trying to be novel. It's drawing from a very specific European visual tradition. The calm, anthropomorphic moon we recognise today was fixed in the cultural imagination in the 19th century, most famously through artists and writers like Edward Lear. A moon with a face that isn't comic or exaggerated or ironic, but watchful, neutral and quietly human. Once that image settled, it became the correct moon. So when Blancpain and Breguet depict the moon this way, they're not copying each other. They're both preserving the same idea, just as the complete calendar resists automation. For its own sake, the moonphase resists reinvention. It trusts memory over novelty. The result isn't expression, it's continuity, and in horology, that kind of restraint is rarely accidental. In a world increasingly designed to remove agency, the user-level trust this watch offers may be its most underrated complication of all. And remember, watch collecting isn't logical, but it is horological. The Blancpain 50 Fathoms has a reputational problem, specifically this: 45mm On paper, the internet has already decided it's too big, unwearable unless you've got wrists like a North Sea diver. But today, standing in the Edinburgh boutique, I did something that most of these opinions haven't. I actually put it on and tried it, and what I discovered surprised me, because the truth is this: diameter isn't the real issue here, thickness is. And once you understand what Blancpain actually changed when they went from 45 to 42.3mm, you start to see that the too big argument is one of the laziest tropes in modern watch collecting. This isn't about raw numbers, it's about how these watches wear in the real world. I experienced these watches in the Chisholm Hunter Blancpain boutique in Edinburgh. The mission was simple: to understand Blancpain case diameters not as numbers on a spec sheet, but as lived worn objects, specifically the 45mm 50 Fathoms. Let's look at a quick spec slide of this watch. The case material is 316L stainless steel. The case diameter is 45mm. The thickness is 15.5mm. The lug width 23mm. The lug to lug 50mm. The movement is the in-house 1315 calibre. It's a 4Hz secured movement. Power reserve 120 hours. The crystal is sapphire box domed with clear AR on the inside only. Water resistance is 300 metres and it weighs 118 grams on the sailcloth strap. And the 42.3mm version, which many collectors seem to default to, is the safe choice. Let's look at a quick spec slide of this watch. The case material is 316L stainless steel. Case diameter 42.3mm. The thickness 14.3mm. Lug width 21.5mm. Lug to lug 48mm. The movement is the in-house 1315 calibre. It's a 4Hz secured movement. Power reserve 120 hours. The crystal is sapphire box domed with clear AR on the inside only. Water resistance is 300 metres and it weighs 100 grams on the sailcloth strap. What I wanted to answer was this: are these watches genuinely too big, or are we just repeating something we've heard other people say? Let's start with the controversial one. The 45mm 50 Fathoms has become shorthand online for unwearable. On a 7-inch wrist, here's what actually happens. The lug to lug is 50mm, which is completely acceptable. The lugs curve aggressively downward, hugging the wrist. There's no floating head, no top heavy wobble. In fact, on the wrist it compares very closely to my Omega Seamaster 300M Professional in the overall footprint. So where does the discomfort with the size come from? It's not the diameter, it's the thickness. At over 15mm, this watch is even thicker than a Tudor Blancpain GMT, and that's saying something. And the concave domed bezel, it doesn't help. It visually stacks height at the edge of the watch, amplifying thickness more than the case diameter ever does. This is not a desk diver, this is a capstone watch, a special occasion diver, the kind that you wear deliberately. One crucial discovery: on the 45mm, rubber over sailcloth every single time. That extra elasticity, it does something important. It anchors the head of the watch to your wrist. It absorbs micro movements and it reduces perceived top heaviness. The sailcloth looks fantastic, but the rubber turns the 45mm from challenging into cooperative. It's a small detail, but it's a big difference. The piece I tried had a solid case back, and honestly, that should be illegal. Hiding the calibre 1315 with its 18 karat gold rotor is a genuine crime. The good news, a sapphire exhibition caseback can be ordered from Blancpain, and it absolutely should be. If you're buying a 50 Fathoms, you deserve to see the movement that defines the watch. Now let's talk about the 42.3mm. This is not a shrunken 50 Fathoms, it's a re-engineered one. Here's what Blancpain actually changed. The case diameter has went from 45mm to 42.3. That's a 6% reduction. The lug width has went from 23mm to 21.5. That's a reduction of 6.52%. The lug to lug has went from 50mm to 48mm, and that's a reduction of 4%. That all tells a story. The most aggressive change is actually the lug width, not the case, and that's intentional. Narrower lugs reduce visual bulk. They improve the strap balance and soften the stance on the wrist. The lug to lug stays relatively long, preserving the 50 Fathoms silhouette. This isn't shrinkage, it's selective refinement. On wrist it measures up beautifully against a 41mm Rolex Submariner, despite what the numbers suggest. Here's the key takeaway. The 42.3 wears better, not because it's smaller, but because it's thinner and lighter. The 45mm watch is 118 grams on the sailcloth strap. The 42.3mm watch is 100 grams on the sailcloth strap. That difference is immediately noticeable, and if you go for the Type 23 titanium version, it's amplified even further. This is where daily wearability is completely won over. Not diameter, it's mass and how that mass distributes on wrist. For me, the 42.3mm steel, sailcloth is the preferred option. 42.3 titanium, I would go for the bracelet if the budget allows for it. The watch feels planted, balanced and genuinely daily capable. The same movement, the same 5-day power reserve, that same Blancpain DNA, just easier to live with. Here's my real world conclusion. The 45mm is not too big, it is too thick to be a daily worn watch, but as a statement diver, it's magnificent. The 42.3mm is the most wearable 13-15 movement 50 Fathoms that Blancpain makes. But in true contrarian fashion, the one that I have shortlisted, the full fat Fathoms 45 on rubber. The dial is the killer detail here. That sloping in, then the doming effect rising up to the cannon pinion. You only get that with the 45mm. This watch is not a daily, but a dive watch collection capstone piece, because sometimes the ultimate dive watch doesn't need to be practical, it just needs to be right. And remember, watch collecting isn't logical, but it is horological. Here's a story about a watch that was dismissed far too quickly. A watch that most people judged before they ever held it, wore it, or understood what it was trying to do. And the more time I've spent with it, the more convinced I am that the early reactionary reviews did accessible horology a real disservice. Today, I want to show you why the Blancpain Swatch Ocean of Storms might quietly be one of the most interesting watches released in recent years, and why, in the fullness of time, it may be remembered as something genuinely special. This story actually starts years ago, long before Swatch ever announced a collaboration with Blancpain. It starts with composite materials, experimentation, and the ongoing debate inside watchmaking about what counts as real horology and what gets dismissed as novelty. I own a Panerai PAM 1661 Carbotech, a watch that was celebrated, genuinely celebrated for its lightness. Every reviewer talked about the way it disappeared on wrist, the high-tech carbon composite case, the warmth of the materials used, the comfort, the softness of the geometry. lightness was marketed as a luxury feature. People associated it with innovation, performance and modernity. On the left we have a historic dive watch reference reimagined in a modern composite material. And on the right we have a historic dive watch reference reimagined in a modern composite material. And yet, when the Blancpain Swatch collaboration arrived, super light on wrist, just as comfortable as the Panerai in all-day wear, many of those same voices looked at the weight and said, it feels cheap. Two watches, one framed as a high-end luxury Swiss timepiece, and the other framed as a cheap plastic toy watch. But the biggest differentiator isn't design implementation or materials choice, it's price. That says a lot more about us than it does about the watch, because comfort doesn't know the price tag. Materials don't suddenly become inferior because they're affordable. And when you actually live with this watch day after day on the wrist, it becomes very clear that the lightness is a strength of the watch, just as it is on the Panerai. And that's where this journey begins. Before we get into engineering, movement philosophy, lume, bezel design, bezel action, anti-magnetic properties, the crystal, or the history of disposable movements, I want to start with the first thing that actually surprised me. Something small, something subtle, something almost no one has mentioned. The dial. The Ocean of Storms has a black sunburst dial, a genuinely beautiful fine sunburst that only reveals itself in the correct light. It's quiet, purposeful, it's easy to miss if you're not paying attention, but when the light catches it, the entire watch, it comes alive with a depth and richness that you simply do not expect from a collaboration at this price point. To me, this looks very close to the dial on versions of the full fat high calorie 50 Fathoms. I've been in the boutique and checked in person. Remarkable to get this dial at this price point. This is going to be a recurring theme here, the unexpected. The lume, for example, is excellent. Not good for a Swatch, not fine for the price tag. Excellent lume, full stop. Bright, consistently applied with real staying power. It feels like a proper diving instrument. Let's look at a quick spec slide of this watch. The case diameter is 42.3mm, the thickness 14.4mm, lug width 22mm, lug to lug 44.5mm. The movement is a System 51 3Hz non-hacking. Power reserve is 90 hours. The crystal is double domed bioacrylic anti-scratch coated. The water resistance is a stated 91 metres, and the weight on wrist with the OEM strap is 45 grams. And the bezel, this is where things get genuinely interesting, because I had two earlier Blancpain Swatch models when the line first came out, an Antarctic and an Atlantic. The bezel action in those early batches, it ranged from just okay to slightly inconsistent. The bezel on this Ocean of Storms, it even sounds remarkably similar, in particular to the 38mm 50 Fathoms watch. Compare the sound.
It's very tight, 120 click, but the space between each click makes it feel like a 60 click bezel.
Now this from the Blancpain Swatch. My Ocean of Storms bezel is noticeably improved over the earlier colourful watches. The clicks are crisp and clean, confident even, and the backplay is practically non-existent, better than many mainstream divers that cost many times the price. This tells us something important. Swatch is iterating, Swatch is developing, quietly, consistently, behind the scenes. They are refining tolerances, tightening moulding precision, improving click springs. They're not treating this like a gimmick, they're treating it like a platform for the future. The Blancpain Swatch uses a bio-based acrylic crystal with a hard anti-scratch coating. It's the same material family as Omega's Hesalite. So you get that warmer optical profile and the slight edge distortion vintage acrylic is well known for. The hard coat improves surface hardness, it doesn't turn it into sapphire. You can still pick up marks and you can still polish them out in a few minutes with Polywatch. Technically it behaves just like a modernised version of Hesalite with an added protective layer, which brings me to a far bigger point, the movement. People love to mock the System 51. They call it disposable, plastic, unserviceable. They repeat the same lines without ever asking if they're true or even if they matter. But let me tell you a story from my own family history. The Westcocks factory in Scotland, one of the great mass manufacturers of clocks and watches in the 20th century, and due to my family connections that I have covered in several previous videos, I have documentation from the 1950s, 60s and 70s stating clearly that Westclock's official policy was to replace movements rather than repair them. Customers could mail in a warranty repair or turn up to the factory in person with a broken clock or watch, hand it over and leave a short time later with a new movement installed. This wasn't unusual or controversial, it was simply good economical industrial practice. They disposed of the broken movements in the scrap metal skip to be recycled after logging the fault and identification numbers on the returned unit. Long term, this helped the quality control department identify common issues and implement design changes for reliability. Timex in the Scottish city of Dundee done the exact same strategy. I have connections to that factory too. Again, replace, not repair. Common all over the industry. This idea that disposable movements are some modern misdemeanour is thoroughly misunderstood by some purists. Historical fiction, if you like. For most of the 20th century, industrial horology was built on modularity, replaceability and efficiency. Ironically, many of the movements that people worship today, the Seiko 4R calibers, entry-level Miyota, even some Sellita, these are replaced far more often than they are repaired. Almost no one talks about this, but it's true. And here's the funniest part, the System 51 is not unserviceable. I've spoken to a watchmaker who can repair them using donor movements. Upgrade kits exist with replacement balance assemblies that can be regulated, and we're at a stage now where 3D printing spare parts is feasible. It's not convenient yet, but it's absolutely possible. You can even change the case on your Blancpain Swatch collaboration to a 316L stainless steel, or even titanium if you so desire. Which brings me on to the part that shocked me. I tested my Ocean of Storms over 72 hours. It gained 2 seconds, not per day, but in total. That's well within COSC chronometer tolerances. That beats many METAS certified movements in the timekeeping department. Then I tested it again, more controlled conditions off the wrist, and I get plus 2 seconds per day. 2 seconds. That is a mega master chronometer territory, Tudor MT series territory, Panerai 3-day caliber territory, high-end Swiss mechanical movement territory, full stop, no debate, none at all. And here's the truth, for me this movement has been rock solid and it keeps excellent time. A £350, $420 Swatch collaboration watch performing at METAS level consistency. That is why I started looking deeper, because this accuracy isn't an accident. It's a direct outcome of the movement architecture. The System 51 uses polymers in the gear train that don't oxidise, they don't dry out, and they don't require traditional lubrication, and they maintain a highly stable friction coefficient over time. The escapement is laser set, similar to many of the Tissot PRX models. The movement is sealed, protected from dust, debris and lubrication migration. The Swatch System 51 doesn't hack by design, and that's part of why it works. Removing the hacking mechanism eliminates extra levers, extra springs and additional friction points, which reduces movement drag overall. It lowers the overall failure rate of the movement. Fewer parts mean fewer tolerances to drift, better energy efficiency and a more stable power reserve. In a sealed, fully automated movement like the System 51, accuracy comes not from adjustment but from consistency, and this is how Swatch engineered it. It has had the ability to behave exactly like its big brother Blancpain 50 Fathoms movements baked right in. It is remarkable and a completely intentional level of attention to detail that no one else seems to have noticed. And here's a further insight nobody seems to have realised. Magnetism doesn't just affect hairsprings and pallet fork escapements. The plates, bridges, screws, or even the case itself can become magnetised, and that creates lingering magnetic fields that distort the movement's timekeeping ability. But polymers don't magnetise, carbon composites don't magnetise, ceramic composites don't magnetise. It also uses a highly anti-magnetic Nivacron hairspring. Belt and braces with this System 51. The Blancpain Swatch has a natural anti-magnetic architecture. By accident or by brilliance, the result is the same. It shrugs off magnetic interference simply because the materials refuse to hold magnetic memory. This same logic applies to Panerai Lab ID, a movement made with carbon nanotube plates, polycarbonate bridges and lubrication-free design, a watch celebrated for its innovation. And when you lay the philosophies side by side, something becomes very clear. The Blancpain Swatch and the Panerai Lab ID, they share the same movement ethos, the same materials intelligence, the same low friction philosophy, the same anti-magnetic behaviour, the same push towards engineered composites instead of traditional metals. Blancpain itself regularly uses ceramic composites in its higher end pieces, one of which I got some wrist time with recently at the boutique, but that's going to be the subject of another video. If you don't want to miss that episode, click the subscribe button below and get notified when that video drops. Then there's the crown. I've actually heard people say it doesn't have a screw down crown and it's only got 91 metres of water resistance as a result. Well, I've got an answer to that too. The original 50 Fathoms was rated to that exact depth level. The clue is in the name, that is 50 Fathoms, the depth rating that gifted the watch its name, along with an obscure reference to the Shakespeare play The Tempest. But I digress. The original 50 Fathoms also didn't have a screw down crown. Rolex had the patent for screw down crowns. That Wilsdorf character, he sure was a wily old fox, but it did encourage Blancpain to deliver their own system of gaskets and crown architecture to essentially achieve the same water resistance as the first Rolex Submariner, all without a screw down crown. This was a trusted, field-tested dive watch that did not have a screw-down crown. Maybe knowing this history helps me be a little less harsh on the Seiko 5KX. The winding on the Blancpain Swatch is anti-clockwise, but when you turn it clockwise, it has a spring-loaded clicking pawl. That makes the whole watch, between that and the bezel, very tactile. A fidget spinner for watch collectors. Solid horological thinking going on there. The Ocean of Storms, it's accessible, it's democratic, it's fun, and it's far more technically interesting than most people have realised. Even the case design supports this narrative. Bioceramic is not brittle like zirconia ceramics, it's a composite. A clever composite, 2/3 ceramic, 1/3 bio-derived polymer, which means it has a hardness and a little flex. It resists cracks because the polymer matrix prevents brittle fracture. In fact, the strap hardware being bioceramic is structurally stronger than many people assume. It absorbs shock, it gives slightly under tension. It's exactly the kind of material you want for buckles and tangs. And the irony, the case of the Ocean of Storms is remarkably similar to my Panerai Carbotech, both in materials choice and architecture. Let's talk about the strap, the concept, recycled fishing nets. It's brilliant. It ties directly into Blancpain's ocean conservation heritage. Philosophically, it's perfect. In practice, the implementation isn't exactly great. It's a polarising design choice. It tells the right story, but it doesn't give the best wearing experience. It doesn't match the character of this particular watch. It's a hangover from those earlier, more colourful Blancpain Swatch watches. I changed mine and it transformed the watch. And that's part of the charm. You can complete the collaboration in your own way. Another item I upgraded was the threaded bars. The original hex bars, while strong, are prone to threading, so the upgraded ones I ordered in solved that issue, and I've kept the OEM bars as backups. This is incidentally another design and implementation synergy with Panerai, who use threaded steel bars across many models, although the Blancpain design is a split threaded bar and Panerai bars screw into threads cut into the lug wall. Ironically, the Carbotech Panerai watches, they use spring bars with metal collar reinforcement, remarkably similar to architecture used in carbon bicycle frames where the wheel axles go through, whereas Swatch actually managed to keep the historical Blancpain hex threaded bars. These threaded bars also enable you to safely use a 20mm NATO strap on the 22mm lug width case. I really enjoyed that small portion of visible bar without the risk of it popping out the way a more orthodox spring bar could when used with a slightly narrower strap. It looks very tool-tastic that way. Long term I have settled on this leather strap with yellow stitching and a large Panerai style DLC coated buckle and tang. It allows you to enjoy that sapphire exhibition case back with the decoration on show, and crucially it moves the watch closer to your wrist. Instead of sitting proud on 2 layers of NATO fabric, it's very easy to forget you're wearing it now. When you put all of these elements together, the comfort, the accuracy, the lume, the vintage look crystal, the bezel action, the anti-magnetism, the materials, the dial finishing, the design DNA, the movement philosophy, the history of industrial replaceability in its true context, you begin to see what the early reviews all missed. This watch isn't superficial, it isn't a gimmick, it isn't a toy. It's actually one of the most sincerely interesting, accessible watches released in the last decade, streets ahead of the better selling but inferior Moonswatch implementation. And here's the line I never expected to say. This is Blancpain's Lab ID at an incredible value. The same philosophy, the same materials implementation logic, the same friction-free anti-magnetic thinking, the same comfort, the same vision of what future mechanical watchmaking can be. Both are modern composite reissues of original military dive watches, both with comfort, convenience and vintage military steampunk charm built right in. Let's do some real world maths. Swatch rates the System 51 very conservatively at around 5 years of daily use, roughly 1,825 running days. But this isn't a daily watch for me. I wear it 2 consecutive days a month, usually at the weekend. Now here's the key point, it doesn't hack and it's got a 90-hour power reserve, so after I take the watch off it keeps running for around 4 more days, so that gives around 6 days of movement operation per month, about 72 days per year. So take that same conservative 1,825 day lifespan and divide it by this usage pattern. And for me, in my usage case, I'm looking at just over 25 years of operation. If the watch doesn't show an obvious manufacturing fault during the 2-year international warranty period, that outcome, it's not unrealistic. It's exactly what the design allows for. At about $500, that's $20 a year. That sure puts a different spin in the situation, and remember, all those figures are conservative. In the fullness of time, I think the early colourful versions will be remembered as the playful spark, but the Ocean of Storms, the monochrome, mature, serious version, is going to be seen as a model that revealed the collaboration's true potential and could potentially open the path to many more collaborations in the future. Breguet, Harry Winston, Jackie Rose, who knows? There is far more to this watch than the dismissive early voices allowed themselves to see. And after living with it, wearing it, testing it, and understanding its engineering, I genuinely think this is something special, a small, unexpected piece of modern horology that resonates with Q Factor far beyond its price point. And remember, watch collecting isn't logical, but it is horological.